Day one bottom line decision.
Bogota, was it bottom line decision about what?
The choices yesterday, about multiple punishments and between death.
No, I mean it's a range of different opinions.
It range between
Yeah,
different
yeah.
opinions.
All right. So today's daf is Tzarich is Lamed Vav 36, and we pick up in the middle of. We actually are a good bit ahead. We pick up in the where it is 2 dots towards the bottom third. Ilanis ein laknas. So we have for the time finished with the discussion of Kimli B'Draba Minei, which was an amazing 7 daf sukya. As I was just sort of discussing here before we got started, the Gemara, there's just to remind you of the different opinions, right? The way the Gemara sort of framed it at the end, which is that if it was a sin that you're chayiv misa for, misa spaced in, then the Gemara at least framed it. Tosos raises if this is necessarily true, but that everybody would agree that would override a monetary payment, even if it was a case of shogeg or the like. If it was a case of kares, then that was the position of Rabbi Nechunya ben Akana, and that was debated. If it was the case of Malkus, there was a wider range debate, where you had Rabbi Meir that said you could get both punishments. You had Ula that said you would pay rather than get Malkus, or Tosu said that might have only been in the case of our case about the Knas of Onus and Mefata. And then you had the standard position, which is you would get Malkus and not pay. And within there was a debate of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, whereas Rabbi Yochanan said only if Malkus was actually administered, and Reish Lakish says even if it was a shogeg and if there wasn't Hataran, if Malkus wasn't administered. So we have a whole nice wide range of possibilities. Okay, the Gemara now anyway is turning back to the issue of the women that do or don't have a knas, not from the kimli perspective, but from the perspective of their personal status. So we have our Mishnah says whether it's an arayot, as long as it's not in the category of chayiv misa, but a case of like sister or whatever would even get that the fact that marriage is not binding would not prevent it. Although and then we have a breita that actually excluded the arayot, reflecting the position of either Reb Shimon HaTeimani or Reb Shimon ben Menasya, who would say that the knas would only be paid if it was a case with a woman who marriage could be binding, or even more restrictive if marriage was actually permitted. And now we're going back, so that's one issue about the personal status in terms of arayot, and then we're getting to the issue about whether it only applies to a nara or even to a katana. Rabbi Meir says only a nara, the Chachamim say even a katana, and the Gemara had an application of that in terms of the case of an illness, of a woman who never gets physical maturity, so she goes from being considered a katana at the age of 20 to being considered a bogeret. She never is in the stage of nara, the puberty stage, and therefore this breita that we were dealing with, not our Mishnah, but the breita we're dealing with starting yesterday, said that she would not get a knas because this breita is assuming that only a nara gets a knas. The other issue in the breita that we're going to turn to now is the question not about nara, not about arayot, but the question about whether the woman is considered to be a betula or not. And to some degree, we dealt with it yesterday also in the case of Mima Enet, a girl who's not halachically married, but who is rabbinically married, but not doraita married, and is living with another man, and that she cannot be assumed to be a betula. And then we're going to deal with other cases about the aspect of the betula part of the definition. Yes.
Have we been using tashlumin and knas interchangeably?
So the Gemara basically has assumed that all monetary payments are the same in terms of the Kimle discussion, although if you remember, within Rebbe Meir, it dealt with the possibility that knas might be a more of an exception, that maybe you don't pay normal compensation in the place of a chiyuv misa, but you might pay a knas in the case of a chiyuv misa. So there are potential differences in terms of the Kimle discussion. Okay, so now the Gemara continues with the illness issue and the other types of women that, not just from Nara perspective, but from a question of Besula perspective, would not get the knas, and it's about 20 lines from the bottom, and the line starts with the word illness. Okay, so the Gemara says like this: illness ein la knas, an illness doesn't have a knas. Of a low pitoi, or if a case of seduction, she doesn't get the knas for that. Okay, for Aminahi, that was the bright we had yesterday, and again, presumably from the perspective that she's never a Nara. Now I'll ask you on this. It says hachareshet va'ashota va'illness, a woman who is a cheresh, a deaf mute, so she's not considered to be a bardat, and we'll see why that's relevant in a minute, or a shota, a woman that is has a mental illness that does not allow them to act normally, in interacting with the larger world, interpret and act normally in the larger world. The illness, or again, this woman who never achieved physical maturity. Yesh and knas, they have a knas. Okay, so that's Cheresh and Shota is new information. Ilanis yesh laknas contradicts the Braita that says ein laknas. We know that the issue with the Ilanis is that she's never a nara. Okay, so that's one area of contradiction. And then the Braita goes on and introduces a new aspect. V'yeshem ta'anas pesulim. Now, ta'anas pesulim, you'll remember going back to the first parak, is the issue that the husband wakes up, comes to base in the morning after the wedding and says, "I was expecting her to be a virgin. She's not a virgin, and therefore she shouldn't have her ksuva should go down from 200 to 100, or she shouldn't get any ksuva because it wasn't what I expected." So yesh l'ta'anas pesulim is not a good thing. I mean, not a good thing for her. It means that the husband has a right to claim that he was cheated. He was expecting her to be a basula, and she wasn't.
Does she have any nigu? Because you can't
all right. So those are all the discussions. So we'll get to that. Those are all discussions of the first parak, and it might be different here because of the women we're talking about. Very good. So we'll get to that.
What about pizza?
Okay. Yeah, let's ignore Pitoy for now. But the relevant point of Yeshem Tanis Basulim is that can it be assumed that they are a basula, okay, which is consistent with Yeshem Knas. So all these women, even though they're Cheresh and Ilanis, right? Maybe you might reasonably think that these are women that maybe certainly the Cheresh and the Shota, the Chereshet and the Shota, that maybe people could take advantage of them, and therefore maybe you might have to be concerned that they're not a basula. So definitely with those two, there's a definite chiddush that they have a Knas and they have Tanis Basulim, which both of them reflect the fact that we assume that they are Basula. Okay, but the seeming contradiction that we're first introducing is the Ilanis has a Knas and our Braita said it doesn't. So the Gemara said, V'hai my rumya. What type of contradiction is that? Ha, Rabbi Meir, ha Rabbanan. We just got through saying that the whole issue with the Ilanis is that she's never a Nara. She goes from being a Ketana to a Bogeret. So fine. So the Braita that says she doesn't have a Knas is Rabbi Meir, that says that only a Nara has a Knas. And the Braita you just quoted that says she does get a Knas is the Rabbanan that says even a Ketana gets a Knas. So big deal. We know what the debate about Ilanis could be. It's not a problem that one Braita says one way, one says the other. So the Gemara says, "V'tkarile, my karile." So what actually even occurred to you that made you think that you could ask this as a problem? I mean, clearly this is a debate of Tanaim about Ilanis, reflecting the debate about whether a Ketana has a Knas. So the Gemara says, "Mishum the Islay the Mir Me'achrisi Aluye." Right, it's right. He knew that this Braita could be answered up, but he had another Braita. He wanted to bring this Braita into the conversation, as it were, because he had another Braita that was even more of a problem, and he wanted to put all these issues on the table. What's the other Braita he wanted to bring into the conversation? The following: Hachereshet v'hashota v'habogeret umukatz eitz. England Tainus Basulim. So a Chereshet and a Shota cannot be assumed to be a Basula. And therefore, if the husband comes to base the next morning and says, "Oh, she wasn't a Basula," we say, "Tough luck. You should have expected that." And you have no Tana. Okay. So now Bogeret and Mukas Eitz are more obvious. Mukas Eitz is a woman who actually we know had some type of a physical injury and therefore is not a basula, at least from the sense of not having the hymen intact. Bogeres, if you might remember, we discussed in the first parak, once she reaches the age of, she passes puberty, right? So is it considered that will therefore the hymen will be thinned out or whatever, and therefore, either she won't have the hymen or that we can't trust his claim that it wasn't there, or there won't be necessarily blood to prove it. But whatever it is, once she's of that age, there's no longer his claim that she was not a basula is no longer accepted. So Mukas Eitz and Bogeres we'll get back to. Those are issues we dealt with in the first parak. But Chereshet and Shota here says you can't assume they're a virgin. Again, the assumption I would have made would be because you assumed that people would take advantage of them. So here's a contradiction. One Braita says that you can assume they're a virgin. They get a knas, and if they're not a virgin, the husband has a tanas basulim the next morning. And this Braita says that there isn't a tanas basulim, which presumably means that you can't assume they're a virgin. So he really just quoted the Braita of Ilanis. He knew there was an answer to Ilanis. He wanted to have a discussion about Chereshet and Shota, and to show that there's a contradiction in the Braitas between whether Chereshet and Shota can be assumed to be a virgin or not. So let's see what the Gemara's answer is. Hasuma, I'm sorry, but now we have the end of this Breita, and Hasuma va'ailanis yeshem tanas besulim. A blind woman and an ailanis, those are assumed to be virgins. So ailanis, obviously, the whole issue there was a knas issue about whether she was, because she wasn't a nara, but of course we can assume that she'll be a virgin. And a blind woman also, we should assume that she's a virgin. Why not? Sumchas omer mishum Rabbi Meir suma ein latanas besulim. But Sumchas says that in Rabbi Meir, no, that even a blind woman cannot be assumed to be a virgin, and there's no tanas besulim the next morning if she isn't. So that's interesting what the issue is about the blind woman. But we're bracketing the blind woman, we're bracketing the ailanis and the bogeret. Right now, what we've put on the table is a seeming contradiction in Braitas, whether we assume that a chereshet and a shota are virgins or not. So let's see what the Gemara's answer is. Amar of Sheishes lo kasha. It's not difficult. So now it is exactly introducing the point that Michael made, which is that it's not the difference about, if there was a machlokas about whether they had a knas or not, then you would say that the question is whether they're assumed to be virgins or not. But the only contradiction in the Braitas was not whether they have a knas. The contradiction in the Braitas was whether there's tanas besulim, whether the husband can make claims she wasn't a basula and therefore be entitled to reduce her ksuva. So to say that the husband can't make that claim, there could be more than one reason. It doesn't just have to be for the reason like, oh, well, you should assume that a chereshet and a shota are not a virgin. No. Maybe there's another reason he can't make that claim. Why not? So, or he won't win with the claim. You can make whatever claim you want, but he won't win with the claim. Why not? So you might remember the debate of Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua when a woman comes and she responds. The husband says you weren't a basula, and she has certain responses. Now she could always say, "Yes, I was. You're lying." But you could also say, "You're right. I wasn't a basula because I was raped after we got married." Or I wasn't a basula because I'm a mukas eitz, right? You always can have some type of various claims you might remember from the earlier Gemara, where based on her response and based on different halachic positions, it would explain why there was no blood or why, petach patuach or whatever, and at the same time, it would not reduce her ksuva because there's a different explanation for the circumstances. So what the Gemara is saying is, when it says ein lehem tanas besulim, it does not mean we assume they're not virgins. We assume that a chereshet and a shota is a virgin, and therefore everybody would agree that she gets a knas. But what it means is, if the husband comes the next morning and says, I assumed you were a virgin and you weren't, and therefore I should be able to reduce the ksuva, or say you're not going to win your claim. Why are you not going to win your claim? So Rashi says, because we could always claim for her, well, maybe she would, these are people that are not bardas, so they cannot sort of represent themselves in court. So we will represent them, and we'll make the most advantageous claim for them. So the claim might be, yes, she was a virgin when there was the kiddushin, but maybe she was raped afterwards, okay? And we'll make that claim for her. So the husband's claim won't win because we'll always defend her position. Tosa says it's not the defense that she was raped afterwards, it's the defense that she became a mukas eitz. But whatever it is, one of the earlier defenses that Rabbi Gamliel says wins is a defense we'll make for her. So when it says that she doesn't have a tanas besulim, it means that we will represent her with the position of Rabbi Gamliel that there is a defense that she can lodge that actually will make her win the case. According to Rabbi Yoshua, though, lo mipi anachayim, you remember that phrase, Rabbi Yoshua, anything she says, she won't win. So when it says ein lehem yesh lehem tanas besulim, that's according to Rabbi Yoshua that says there's no defense that she can wage. Okay, so the Gemara says ha Rabbi Gamliel hava Rabbi Yoshua. So the Gemara says 1 minute. When did Rabbi Gamliel say that if she says certain things, then the husband doesn't win? When she actually makes a particular claim about explaining why she wasn't a virgin on the wedding night. But if she's not making that claim, would he ever say that she wins? So Gemara says, yes. Since Rabbi Gamliel said she would be believed with certain claims, she goes, this is a case of open up your mouth for the sake of the mute. Meaning, so yes, based in sometimes we'll defend and lodge these, sort of make the arguments, the ta'anot, for the people that are not able to defend themselves. Even though, of course, the irony is that sometimes the reason the woman is believed is we'll say, well, she would never be so brazen to lie about this in the presence of her husband. Other types of things that would not necessarily be true if somebody else was waging the defense for her. Or just the very fact that it's a bari. That when the woman says that she's making a definite claim, whereas when Beis Din is saying it on her behalf, they're making a doubtful claim. Nevertheless, sometimes if the other person is not considered like a bardas or maybe is a minor or other types of cases, Beis Din might actually present, position themselves as that person and lodge the best defense, even, if on their behalf. Okay, so basically we've got a contradiction in Braitas whether Chereshet and Shota have a Tanas Basulim. You could have said it was a debate about whether we assume them to be virgins, and therefore it would be a debate about Knas. The Gemara is saying that's not true. Everybody would agree that they get Knas. Everybody would agree that the presumption is that they're virgins. The question is, comes the next morning after the wedding, and the husband says you weren't a virgin, do we say the husband wins or not? That's a different question. One position says, yes, he does win because he was right to assume that they were virgin. The other says, no, we will take the position of Rabbi Gamliel that there's a possible counterclaim she can make, and we basically will represent her in that counterclaim, and therefore the husband will not win. Okay. All right. So that was the Chereshet and the Shota. Again, fascinating that it's saying that we do assume that they're virgins, because again, I would imagine then as now that these are often people that other people will take advantage of and maybe cannot make the same types of assumptions. All right. Thank you, by the way, for the coffee.
One quick question. So about this. So the Chereshet and the Shota. So like, how do you actually give her the Ketuvot?
You mean like who's taking care of her money for her? Okay, so there's issues. So there's like, the court will also assign apotropos, right? People to take, exactly. All right, so now the Gemara goes on. Okay, so Bogeres ein latanas. So Mukas AIDS, we understand. Mukas AIDS is a woman that doesn't actually have a hymen. And anyway, there's the whole debate before about Rabbi Meir and the Chamim. Is she considered Basula 200, 100? But anyway, that's the case where physically she doesn't have a hymen. That's not, so there's no Tainus Basulim. But what about Bogeres, right? So the Gemara says, we assume Bogeres, the hymen is no longer intact. V'amar Rav, so now we're getting way back to first parak discussions. Okay, we're a little digressing from the whole issue about Knas. The Hamar Rav, Bogeres, no similar Laila Rishona. Rav says that a Bogeres has the first night. What does this mean? It goes back, you might remember the debate of, or the issue of Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, about a woman who, on her wedding night, this is a Nida discussion, and she bleeds. So nowadays, we assume that anytime a woman is a virgin, the hymenal bleeding, we treat it as if it's Dam Nida, and we automatically make her Nida. But in the time of the Mishnah, and in different stages within the Gemara, it was an issue that developed over time in the Gemara, basically it was the opposite. We assume that any bleeding can be attributed to hymenal bleeding, and therefore is not a Nida. And then the question becomes, how much bleeding after the wedding night do we still assume is hymenal bleeding and therefore not a problem? So if she was a Nara, we give her more time. If she was a woman that hasn't even regularly had her period yet, we give her even more time. But let's say she's a woman who's regularly been having her period and she's a Bogeret. How much bleeding can we attribute to the hymenal bleeding and make her not a Nida? Only the first night, Laila Rishona. Okay, fine. But what it does show you is that the first night there will be hymenal bleeding. So therefore, what do we mean when we say a Bogeres doesn't have Tanas Basulim, which means that he should have expected that there was no hymen, that she wasn't a Basula? We assume that there is hymen, and there will be hymenal bleeding. So of course, so that shows that we do expect that, not only is she a Basula from the perspective of never having had sex, but she's also a Basula from the perspective of the hymen is still intact. Okay, we do assume that by a Bogeres. So therefore, if that wasn't the case, why is his claim not a legitimate claim? There was no blood the wedding night. That's what he'll say.
What forces Rashi to say Boel Kama Bilo?
Because it's Laila Rishon. It's the whole first night. It's not just the first act of sex. So that he's explaining the halachic implications.
Why is the
all bleeding the first night, and even if it's after even through many acts of sex, will all be attributed to hymenal bleeding. Okay, so the Gemara says, either Katayin, so the top of Lamed Vav Lamed Bet, either Katayin Tainus Domim, Hachanami. So if he says there was no blood, then you know what? Then he would be believed. Then it would be a good claim because we assume a Bogeres, the hymen is still intact and there will be blood. And therefore, if he says there wasn't blood, then we say, okay, he assumed she was a virgin. She wasn't. Had she been a virgin, then there would have been bleeding. There wasn't bleeding, so that's good evidence because even a Bogeres, we assume there's going to be bleeding. So he has a claim she wasn't a virgin. But Hachanami, what are we talking about? The Katayin Tanas Petach Patuach. He didn't make a claim about the blood. He said, I didn't check for the blood. I don't know if there was bleeding or not. But what I can tell you is, it didn't feel like he was a virgin because, of the Petach Patuach claim. It felt like the door was already open in terms of, how much, how tight the experience was or not. So that, if you remember, was the earlier discussion. That the Gemara says, that's not a claim. Because by Bogeres, by the time her body has developed a little bit, it might feel to you, the man, assuming anyway, there was a whole discussion last time whether we even believe him in his claim, if he knows what he's talking about when he says Petach Patuach. But even if we assume that he can experientially know what he's talking about, we say it would have felt, it feels different now that she's, a little more mature. It's not going to feel the same way. So any claim of Petach Patuach is not meaningful. It doesn't prove anything. But the claim of lack of blood, that does say something, because even by a Bogeres, we would have assumed that there would have been blood. So just when you thought we were out of all of those uncomfortable discussions from the first parak, we get an opportunity to revisit it right now. But moving right along. Okay, I don't know which is better, to be discussing the cases of rape or to be discussing the cases of Petach Patuach and Tanas B'Sulam. Anyway, Sumcha Somer Mishum Rabbi Meir, Suma Ein La Tanas B'Sulam. So by Asuma, the guy cannot claim, she wasn't a virgin, and let's reduce the ksuva, because we basically say to him, you should have expected she wasn't. Now, why is Asuma different? Okay, that's not clear. Let's take a look. So the Gemara says, again, you could always make the issue about taking advantage, but the Gemara didn't seem to feel that was an issue by Chereshet and Shota. So my time of the sumchis, what's the reason of sumchis? Because she'll trip on the ground, and maybe she'll have some type of an injury that will basically make her muchasetz, which will cause the hymen to rupture, and therefore you have to assume that. So if he says, there was no hymenal bleeding on the wedding night, we say, yeah, whatever, that's not a claim. She probably happens through some other accident, and he should have anyway expected that. So the Gemara says, Kulu nami chavute michpat. So all people trip and have accidents, not just blind people that have accidents. All people have accidents. So, and it's nice that the Gemara doesn't insist that blind people get into accidents more than people with sight. I do wonder. It's an interesting question, how much in the time of the Gemara were blind people able to navigate, in terms of echolocation or the type of the walking stick or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, but the Gemara doesn't claim that it doesn't come back and say no, but they have more accidents. That's not the Gemara's answer. The Gemara's answer is no. Kulu ro'os umars iman. If any young girl has an accident and then she sees some blood coming out from between her legs, then she'll tell her mother what happened. And her mother will say, it sounds like, your hymen got ruptured. So, this one doesn't see what happened and therefore doesn't say anything to her mother. And therefore she thinks that she still is a basula in the sense of the hymen is still intact when it isn't. So it means that a guy marries a normal woman, since she doesn't say, by the way, you should know that a sighted woman. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you. Erase the tape. Okay, a sighted woman. I'm fine. I just meant it was a legally distinct case. All right, fine. All right. Chatasi avisi pashati. What?
Sense of our perception of that.
Right. Well, that's also true.
Yeah, I know that.
But you
that
still feel the
really
blood.
I understand that.
But she doesn't know she's wet if she's in the shower.
Right. Yeah, I was wondering about that too. And you could also, you feel something and you smell it, and you can also get a sense of what it is by its thickness. I was also very much wondering about that. What does it think? It thinks that the blood just falls on the ground, not on her body.
Right.
Yeah. So I also did not understand that. But the argument is that a woman with sight who basically gets married, it's since she doesn't say anything to the husband, he has a right to assume that she's a virgin and this implicitly the hymen is still intact. And if he finds out the wedding night that's not the case, then that's his taina, either that's evidence that she isn't a virgin, however you define virginity in terms of hymen or having had sex. But he had the right to assume that she was a virgin on all accounts. Whereas this woman, we basically say the next morning, we say, you didn't have a right to assume that, because maybe not like we assume it always happens, but maybe she had some accident and she wouldn't have known to have told you that she was basically a mukas eitz. So that's Sumchas's opinion. But yes, I agree that it's bizarre that we assume that she wouldn't be able to know that something was amiss. Okay. According to Sumchas and Rabbi Meir, but it's giving a different explanation for it, right?
Just the concept that she wouldn't know what's happening to her.
Right. In terms of that, right. So the Gemara now says, so that was the end of the contradictory braitas. Now we go back to the first braita that we started with, which says that another woman who doesn't get knas is a woman who's being divorced because of shemra. Now, shemra is the case in the Torah of Otzia leha shemra, And normally when that claim is proven, then it proves that she committed adultery, and then she's not just getting divorced, she's actually getting stoned, right? She's actually getting executed. And what exactly, and anyway, that's a woman who's been married. So if the woman's been married, what's the case about a Nara Basula? What's even going on here? So the Gemara says, Hayotis Mishum Shemra. So the Gemara says, Baskilahi. So she's getting stoned, okay? So Tosfos actually has two interesting explanations about what this challenge is. If you take a look at Tosfos, Hayotis Mishum Shemra Baskilahi, Tosfos says, Upshita delav bas knasi daha beula vadahi, right? Because she's definitely now has had sex. I mean, she committed adultery. That's why she's getting stoned. Okay, so that's one explanation. You can't just say it means that if she's married, then that would override knas because of the principle of kimle. Maybe she's a virgin and married, and the guy who therefore raped her doesn't have knas because he also committed adultery. You can't say that. Why? So because basically there are cases where we might not say, cases of kimle, and that gets back to that whole conversation. Okay. Anyway, so let's go on.
What's the difference between Mishum Shemra and Sota? Sota is just a suffix?
Yeah. So, and this is right. Yeah. Sota is a suffix. So the Gemara says like this. Of course, so anyway, so it says Baskila, he could either mean, the interesting point is that in theory, a woman could be, if you bracket, the point I was making by reading the Tosfos is that if you bracket Kimle, right, the fact, when the Torah says if a man rapes an Arab, Basula, etc., right, and he pays, right, and then it says, Velotia Isha, right, if I said, what if the woman was married? I don't think your response would be, oh, then he doesn't pay because of Kimle. Or then he doesn't pay because she's not a basula. Presumably, we assume that, like for us, the Gemara assumes na'ara, right? The Gemara basically, assumes that that's a question about her age. But I think that we assume that I assume that the pshat of Psusuk is that she's dafka not married. That's like implicit in describing the case. Okay, so what's interesting here is that, is that you could have said, oh, of course that's not included. She's not married. But no. The fact that she's married is just because therefore we assume that she's a be'ula, or therefore there's a principle of kimle that would kick in. But the married state itself would not necessarily exclude her, in terms of her status automatically from that category. But that's the Gemara's question. The Gemara says, okay, but how could she get a knas? She's a batskila, which means that she's definitely a be'ula. All right? So the Gemara says, Amar Sheshes, Hachikama. Now this is how you have to read it. We're not talking about the biblical shemra, that the husband says she committed adultery and it's been proven, etc. It means yotzeit, because what does the word yotzeit mean? We assume yotzeit means that the husband was divorcing her because of a shemra, which means that adultery had been substantiated. It says no, yotzeit mishum shemra means like the rumor has gone out that she is, well, maybe kicked out of her father's house, I don't know, but that Martha said. The rumor has gone out that she is that she sleeps around, okay, that she's promiscuous. And therefore, you have to assume that she's a be'ula. Okay, so that's how we're reading it, a very different thing.
I mean, if you combine that the other thing, then she's promiscuous, like preteen, right, essentially?
What?
Meaning, when was this gone out? If this whole thing is...
well, let's take a look at what the Gemara says.
Naros and Bagros.
Okay, so let's take, right, that's true. But let's take a look at what the Gemara says. Okay, so the Gemara says, so ein laknas below pite. Amar papa shmamina. So from here we can infer that it's just because of a rumor and we make certain assumptions. So hai shtara reya, if there's a document that's been suspect, no proof, but people are saying, oh, looks to me, I've heard that it was forged and it's just a rumor. Lo magbinim be, we won't use it. So here's the question: how much does law pay attention to rumors? So the Gemara says no. Hey chidami, let's figure out this case. What's the case that you would say we wouldn't use a document? If there's just like a rumor that it's a forgery. Would you say they're in parallel? That if a woman if there's a rumor that she's promiscuous, that then we just assume it's true?
Nice pun.
Zaifan Zanai, maybe. Vahama Rava, doesn't Rava say, Yatza Lashem Be'ir? Even if there's a rumor that she in the town that this woman is promiscuous, that's nothing. You're not concerned about it. You don't pay any legal attention to it, any halachic attention. It has no weight. So clearly, we're not just talking about stam people are gossiping. That wouldn't have any weight. So the Gemara says Ella. So here must be the case where we assume that there's a real there might be real substance, and we have to be halachically concerned about it in terms of this issue of knas. The Asu Beitrei V'Amri, two people say, come. So number one, it's witnesses. There's two people, okay, and they're testifying. It's not just stam people gossiping, and they're giving first-hand account. Now, what are they giving first-hand account at? If they say that they saw her, they actually saw her sleep with another guy, then that's not just a rumor. That's actually witnessing that she's a be'ula. So what can we say that would create a presumption without being fact, but still is better than rumor? So here's what they say. Two people come and they testify. But the Amri Liditu Amar Lahu. I'm sorry. First, we're going to start with the star case, and we're going to get to the woman case. So that two men come and testify that in the case of the star, this Malva, the guy who's saying that he has $100 star against this person, came to them and said to them, "Liditu Amar Lahu Zaifuli, forge for me a document." Okay, so they say Reuven now is taking out $1,000 star against. Oh, okay. So I did skip a line. It does start with the woman. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Two people come and say this woman basically, not seduced us. Well, it could be seduced us, but anyway, basically asked us to have sex with her. Okay, so therefore, it's actual hard evidence about an actual case that occurred. It's not stam or rumor, but the case isn't that they saw her have sex, but they saw her act in a very promiscuous way.
She propositioned.
But the other
way around, it wouldn't be believed, right? Because
correct. Right. Okay. Anyway, wouldn't say anything about her status. But if she's coming and propositioning strange men who she's not married to, whatever, that creates a presumption that presumably she slept with somebody if she didn't sleep with them. Okay, and therefore she has to be. There's a concern that she's a be'ula in terms of the knas. So the Gemara says, right. So in parallel by the star, the Asubei army, two people come and say, "Liditu Amar Lahu Zaifuli." They people say, so Shimon now has $1,000 star against Reuben has $1,000 star against Shimon. These witnesses come and say, "We don't know about that star, but what I can tell you is Reuben came to us a week ago and said, forge for me a star against Shimon." Okay, so we didn't, and I don't know about this star per se, but I'm going to tell you that a week ago he was asking us to forge a star just like that. Okay, and therefore we won't use the star because that creates a real concrete suspicion of the validity of this star. So the Gemara says, "Bishlema." 1 minute. The Gemara says, "I'm not sure you can compare the case." Bishlema hasam shchichi prutim. I get the case by the woman propositioning the men that even though they said no, we have to be concerned that she slept with somebody because you'll always find somebody who will say yes. Okay, so there are people who are not, restrained, who are promiscuous, men who are promiscuous as well. And if a woman's going around propositioning, we have to assume that somebody's going to say yes. Okay, so therefore that's why we have that presumption based on their testimony. Just because we know that Reuven is looking to forge a star, we have to assume that anybody they'll ask will do the right thing and won't forge. So meaning it's interesting. We can assume that people that are propositioned will men that are propositioned, eventually you're going to find somebody that's going to say yes, but people that are propositioned to forge a document, presumably even offered money to do so, they're going to have a cheskes kashrus, and we can assume that nobody ever said yes. Okay, it's an interesting, I'd say that's, an interesting assessment of human nature. Okay, so the Gemara says, no. Hachanami, here too, it's not true. Eventually, you're going to find someone to say yes. Kivin the Kamahadar Ziyufa, Aimer Ziyufa Zaif. Oh no, excuse me, it doesn't say you'll find someone to say yes. Kivin the Mahadar Ziyufa, since you're looking around to find somebody to forge it, Aimer Ziyufa Zaifa, because of even if you can't find other people to forge it, you'll forge it yourself. Okay, so even in the end, the Gemara is saying that we'll more readily assume that that a man will say yes to this woman propositioning him than we'll assume that anybody ever said yes to forge a document. Okay, so it's quite presumably even though they're being offered money. So that's fascinating. Today, there's no difference. I don't know about that. Okay, so anyway, all right, but that's the Gemara's difference, that if there's some concrete evidence of certain behavior, just rumor isn't enough, but concrete evidence of certain behavior, that will at least create a presumption that she's not a virgin for the purpose of the issue of knas.
Yes. In this context, is pitui an additional type of knas? It's also a
so no. So pitui, Tosa asks why it says knas and pitui, since by pitui also it's the same knas.
Right.
It's just to explicitly include the case of mefuta. I mean, Tosfos has another explanation, but let's just
So
assume
the
that's true.
Brisa didn't mention Pitui.
Yeah,
Might as well-
presumably.
it's the
Yeah,
same-
presumably. We're going to assume it's all the same. Okay, next Mishnah. And this Mishnah parallels the first one, and as we'll see, sort of says things that we've been assuming for the last week. The Elush Eilen Knas, the following don't have a Knas. And first we're going to list people who are assumed to be a Be'ula, not a Basula. Habala Giyaris Valashvuya Valashefcha, a convert, a woman who's converted, or a woman that was taken captive, or a woman who is a slave, a non-Jewish slave. And now they've been either redeemed or converted or freed. So if their transition happened when they were more than 3 years old, then we have to assume that in their state of non-Jew, slave, or captivity, they actually had either consensual or non-consensual sex. And since it happened after the age of 3, that made them a non-basula, both in terms of the act of sex, it was considered an act of sex, and that the hymen would have ruptured and not come back. So therefore, these women, because we assume in their state they are having consensual or non-consensual sex, and it was their state was when they were older than 3, they are considered to be a bu'ula. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shvuya sheniftes harei b'kedushata. Now here's an interesting position, because we spent through a whole sugya about a woman who's a shvuya, and is she muteris to her husband, a kohen, and do we assume that a woman taken captive has been raped? And here Rabbi Yehuda basically says, no, a shvuya who has been redeemed, we assume she retained her sanctity, meaning we assume that she's not been raped. She afa pisha gedola, even if she's an adult. So therefore, a shvuya, even as an adult, gets a knas. And of course, then the obvious question is, so would she be allowed to go back to her husband, the kohen? Why didn't we say this earlier? Tell me she can go back to her husband, the kohen. So we'll see about that in the Gemara. So that's the cases about assuming somebody is a bu'ula. Now we get back to the case about personal status, and the cases where it's not just a woman that there's no kiddushin binding, like sister, where the first Mishnah said that even with no kiddushin possible at all, there's still going to be a knas. Here it's going to be a woman who actually is a case of incest that is chayiv misa, that's punishable by the death penalty. Haba'al bito, if a man has sex with his daughter, abat bito, abat beno, or his granddaughter, abat ishto, his stepdaughter, his wife's daughter, abat beno, or his wife's granddaughter, abat bita, or whatever, granddaughter, either way. Okay, all those are cases about chayiv misa. Ein lehen knas, no knas. Now why? Even if there's knas, even if there's no possibility of kiddushin, why is this different than the case of sister? And now we have what we've been assuming for the last week, because it is a sin deserving of death. And it would actually be with the right evidence and the right intent, it would be put to death in court. And anybody who is doing something that is basically, liable for their very life, is doing a capital offense, doesn't pay money. If there is no tragedy, there's no death, then you pay the fine. If the woman, in the case of the miscarriage or whatever, dies, and it's an act of murder, then that even if the person won't be executed, therefore there will not be any monetary payment. So now you understand why for the last week not only have we been assuming that in the case of chayiv misa it overrides, but why we were focusing on the issue about ason and this pasuk about ason, right, as the basis for saying that it overrides, because that is the pasuk used in this Mishnah. Okay, so the Gemara is thankfully not going to revisit really the case of, it is going to revisit a little bit, but not today, the case of Kimle. We're going to now just continue to focus for a while on the issue about the Knas. Yes.
But if there is an ason, according to the Pshadat pasuk, if there is ason, the hard death was b'shogeg, right?
So that gets to the question about Chizki, Tana Debei Chizki, of Chayvim Misus Shogegim. Okay, and then the question is ason or din ason and so on.
Is it possible that the drasha here is ason, meaning the person's death, that is the murderer's death. In other words, not her death.
Well, no, that's what the Gemara refers to as din ason, but that does not sound like pshat in the Mishnah, because then the Mishnah would not say that you don't pay a knas. It would have only said you don't pay a knas if actually there was eidim and hasran, you're being put to death. So the Mishnah seems to categorically say there's no knas, which means any type of a capital offense, even if it's not with the conditions that would actually execute the person, that would still override. Okay, and that's what the Gemara discusses about, Tana Debei Chizkiya and the difference between ason and din ason, etc. Okay, I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yehuda, now we're going to focus on this issue of Shvuya, which is a very interesting new piece of information. The position of Rabbi Yehuda, that there's no knas. that there is a knas that we assume that she's still a basula. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Dosa, Amar Davar Echad. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Dosa said the same thing. Rabbi Yehuda Hadam, and Rabbi Yehuda we just said that he says that we assume a shvuya is still a virgin or has not been raped. Rabbi Dosa Titania, Rabbi Dosa we taught. Shvuya ochelas betruma. Rabbi Dosa, if a woman was captive and then she comes back and she's, let's say, married to a kohen, she can continue to eat, or let's say not a case of married to a kohen. Let's say she's a bas kohen, she can continue to eat truma. Okay, whereas if she had sex with a non-Jew, even if it was non-consensual, that would have invalidated her from eating truma. So it's the same assumption. The assumption is that we assume she's not raped. The Rabbi Dosa. Amar Rabbi Dosa. Now he's going to explain his position. What are you afraid that this captor ditter? Interesting, he refers to as an Arab. Okay, so Tosafos has some discussion there about like maybe certain assumptions they made about whatever certain national characteristics or whatever racial characteristics. But we're going to bracket that. Okay, what did this captor do to her? Is it just because he fondled her breast that he should invalidate her from kahuna? So he basically says, yeah, captors do not rape their captives. Okay, I don't know why he assumes that, but that was his assumption. Maybe they might do some type of sexual misconduct, but they're not. Yeah, well, whatever. But they're not actually going to rape them, and therefore we do not have to assume that she was raped, and it does not change her status. Okay, so the Gemara says, Amar Rabba, Diamalohi. Although it's true that both Rabbi Dosa and Rabbi Yehuda are assuming they're not raped, they applied them in different areas of halacha, and maybe they did not mean across the board. Maybe each one only applied it to his area of halacha and would assume you can't make that assumption in other areas. Why? Rabbi Yehuda only says that we assume that she hasn't been raped, that she's still a virgin. If Ella shelo yechote niskar. So because basically, it's an interesting point about policy consideration. The rapist pays his 50 shekel. So if he's not going to pay for whatever technicality, then it's going to be a sinner, somebody who actually, raped or even in case of seduced this woman, is going to do it without there being the same type of consequences, right? So he's going to benefit in the sense that he'll have done this terrible act and he'll be free from at least some of the consequences. So therefore, we have a policy reason to want to insist that the knas should apply in as many cases as possible. So given that we have a doubt, should we assume a woman who was taken captive was raped or not? Is she a virgin or not? So maybe you'll say, you know what? In the case of knas, I'm going to assume that she's a virgin because I have a policy reason why I want to ensure that knas is applied to as many possible cases as possible in a case of rape and seduction, that we have as few exceptions as possible to the halachas of knas. Okay, so that's why he'll be willing to assume in our case to assume that she's still a virgin.
That's what he means by chot and niskar here. In other words, so that in other cases,
no, that a case of a rape, you don't get the guy doesn't get away without paying. If he would get away without paying, the sinner, the rapist, would be niskar, would benefit that he'd get away without paying. So therefore, maybe he's not 100% sure she's still a virgin, but he's willing to assume it for halachas of knas because he doesn't want people to escape the punishment of knas. Okay.
How would that prevent people from escaping the punishment of knas?
You're closing loopholes.
She is a
virgin, then he has to pay the 50 shekel. Here's a woman that was taken captive, and a year later, somebody raped her. So if we say that a woman was taken captive is in a knas, you could just say that people will be more ready to take abuse of her, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
that's after she's freed. In other words, somebody will have to treat her as if she,
exactly. Okay, so it's at first she was taken captive, and then sometime after she was freed, she was raped.
People will be
right. Okay. So therefore, because of that policy reason, he's going to assume that she's still a virgin. Aval Hasan, but when it comes to truma, he'll say, look, I would more be machmir when it comes to truma and say, don't eat truma. Maybe don't let her eat truma. Maybe she actually was raped. But for other halachas, I'm going to treat her like, but for the halach of knas, I'm going to treat her like a virgin. Okay? Inami, or you say the reverse. Arkan lokam Reb Dosa. So when does Reb Dosa say that we can assume she's still a virgin and she can eat truma, or not virgin, whatever. She hasn't been raped and she can eat truma. Ela b'truma d'Rabbanan. That's truma, which is nowadays truma is rabbinic. Avok knas d'oraita, but paying a monetary fine, which is a biblical issue, and it's taking money from somebody. Maybe he'll say we're going to have to assume that she isn't a virgin. I won't make somebody pay money unless I can, once there's a serious question. But for truma, I'll be willing to be lenient. So each area of halacha has a reason to be maybe more lenient or more strict. So when they're saying we're going to assume that she still hasn't been raped, maybe they're not going to assume it across the board. Maybe they're only going to assume it in one area of halacha and not in another area. Yes.
So, unless I'm misinterpreting this, it sounds like there's the concept of knas even at least in terms of the time of the Mishnah, approximately times of the Gemara, right? That they were enforcing this thing.
Oh, you mean because we're using policy issues of Chotei Niskar?
So, like, you know, when did this stop?
Well, it's true. I mean, the Gemara does say that Shlichusayu Kavdinan, and we still don dine knasos. But even though the Gemara says things like Chotei Niskar, it could still mean it more in theory than in practice. It doesn't actually mean that we're actually practicing these cases. But anyway, all right. So the Gemara says like this. I don't know exactly when. I mean, Knas has whole issues about Chotei Niskar, and is it shliach or not shliach? Anyway, the Gemara says like this. Okay, Amalei Abaye. So Abaye says, "The time of Rabbi Yehuda hacha shelo yichotei niskar." 1 minute. You think when Rabbi Yehuda says that we assume she wasn't raped, it doesn't mean an across-the-board assumption. It means, we'll make that assumption because of certain policy reasons, because of chotei niskar. Can you really say that? V'hatani, we turn to Bryce, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, shvuya shenishbeis, harei b'kedushasa. So same language that we started with. A shvuya taken captive, she's still consumed to be not having been raped. Afilu bas eser shanim ksuvasa masayim, even if she's not, even if she's a whole ripe age of 10. I don't know what the point of that was. Anyway, she still gets her whole 200 ksufa. Okay, so now we're not just saying it about somebody doing this horrific act of rape. We're saying even for ksuva halachas, we assume she's a virgin. What? Oh, bas eser shanim? I don't think so.
That's the way I understood it.
I don't know. I don't think so. Okay, anyway, I don't know, but I would make sense about the afilu. Why? How does your English translate it? 10 years old. Yeah, Bas. Although I hear your point. Anyway, okay. So if he really thinks she might have been raped, and it's only a policy issue because of the case of knas. Oh, I see why I was being confusing, because I'm talking about being raped as a shuya and then being raped as the knas. Okay, anyway, if he actually thinks that she might have been raped as the shuya, but there's a policy reason that he wants to say that the knas is still going to be paid in a later case of onus and mafata, so then why would he make the assumption that she's a virgin for ksuva reasons? So the Gemara says, no, there's also policy issues going on there. If you say a woman after being captive, anybody who marries this woman now after she was taken captive only pays 100 for the ksuva, not 200. So people won't be as interested in marrying her, because you're basically telling people you have to assume that she was raped. So it's actually a fascinating Gemara where the Gemara is actually saying, we don't exactly know. We'll make certain assumptions based on policy considerations. So when it comes to how people are going to treat her, after a woman's captive, all the more we'll want somebody to marry her, right? Because actually Dafka people will treat her as as spoiled goods or something like that. So there's a real policy reason to insist, no, she's assumed to be a virgin, 200 ksuva, and if somebody rapes her now, has to pay the knas, assumed to be a virgin. We want to protect her, protect society. We want to keep that in place. Okay, but when it comes to the question, should she eat truma? All right, truma is a different question. It's not an issue about how society will perceive her status. All right, so that's what the Gemara says. It could very well be policy reasons. So now the Gemara is going to go on, okay, and say, is this really true that Rabbi Yehuda holds that she's still considered to be a virgin?
But he wouldn't have this one to marry a Kohen, would he?
Possibly not, and that's what the Gemara is going to discuss exactly now. Vatanya, hapodes shvuya. If somebody redeems a woman captive, and this is assumed to be a Kohen here, because a Kohen wouldn't be able to marry her if she had had sex with a non-Jew, whether consensual or not, Yisa'ena, he can marry her. Okay, which means he can assume that she's a virgin, or that she hasn't had sex with this non-Jew. Meidba, if he testifies about her that she has not had sex, lo yisena, he can't marry her. Now that's a little bizarre. Why the more that he knows, he can't marry her? So the Gemara will get to that. Rabbi Yehuda Omer benkach ubenkach lo yisena. Rabbi Yehuda says in either case he can't marry her, which is the question, because Rabbi Yehuda is the one that normally assumes she hasn't had sex. Why here does he say either way he can't marry her? But first the Gemara has to explain the first part of the Braita. Hagufa kasha, the beginning is intrinsically contradictory. Amarta hapodes shuya yisa'ena. First you said the guy who redeems her can marry her, presumably even without any special knowledge. The Hadar Tana made balo yisena. When he testifies that she hasn't had sex, he can't marry her. Mishum de made balo yisena, because he testifies and he knows that she hasn't had sex. That's why he can't marry her. So the Gemara says no. Halo kasha. That's not difficult. Hachikama. This is what it means. Hapodes shvuya. If you redeem a woman umeidba, and testify about it. In normal cases, you can't assume she hasn't had sex. But if the guy, you need to be testified that you were there and you saw that she wasn't raped and she wasn't mishandled, etc. So if you are not only testifying about her, but you're testifying about her and you say you have definite knowledge she hasn't had sex, and you're the one redeeming her and you're paying money to free her, then Yisa'ena, you can marry her. Made Bakidi, if the guy just testifies about her status, but has not paid the money to redeem her, Lo Yisa'ena, he can't marry her. Now the reason of the difference is we basically say that if he didn't pay money to redeem her, and maybe he's just saying that she didn't have sex because he wants to marry her. Maybe he doesn't really know. Maybe he's lying. But if he's actually going to pay good money to redeem her, then he wouldn't be paying the good money unless actually, unless actually he was telling the truth, which is pretty funny. Here you are, you're ready to live your life with this woman, commit your life with this woman, okay? But maybe you're lying because you're so attracted to her, you're going to lie and say that she actually didn't have sex. Okay, but if you actually have to first pay money, then anyway, that's the assumption. But the way the Gemara is reading this brighta is, and again, we're talking about a Kohen for whom this would be a problem, that the assumption would be that she has had sex unless you can testify that she has not. Okay? Mikom Makam Kashal Rabbi Yehuda. But now we've got a problem because Rabbi Yehuda says in either situation he can't marry her, which is the exact opposite of what Rabbi Yehuda's normal assumption is. His normal assumption is that she hasn't had sex. Again, this is assuming, as Tosfos points out, that Rabbi Yehuda is not saying a policy position. The Rabbi Yehuda is saying a categorical statement that we assume that she hasn't had sex. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Papa, Ema Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ben Kach Ben Kach Yisa'ena. Okay, switch the gears. Have Rabbi Yehuda say either way he can marry her because we assume that she hasn't had sex. Rav Huda Braid Rabbi Yeshua Omer Olam Kidiktani. No, it's like it said. Either way can't. But Rabbi Yehuda Livrei D'Rabbanan Kamer. Rabbi Yehuda is saying back to the rabbis, according to the way that you're approaching it, from your perspective. Lididi, as far as I'm concerned, Ben Kach Ben Kach Yisa'ena. Either way he could marry her because we assume that a woman taken captive has not been raped. And again, as Tosfos points out, this is bracketing saying that it's based on policy. It's based on it's just a general assumption that a woman taken captive we assume is not raped for all purposes, not just for ksuva, not just for knas, even for a Kohen marrying her. That's my position. But you, who generally assume that she has been raped, either way you shouldn't marry her because we violate. That's what you should be saying. Because why? Either way, we should be assuming that even if he's testifying, maybe he's lying and maybe his Yetzer Hara got the better of him. Rabbanan, and the rabbis would say back, Hapodas are shvuya umeid by Yisa'ena, if he not only is testifying about her that she hasn't been raped, but even redeeming her and paying money, then we can trust him. Lo shadi inish zuze bichti. People don't throw their money away for no reason. Okay, made kedi lo yisen. If he just testifies without actually redeeming her, then he can't marry her. Shema ein of nasan, but maybe he just has his Yetzer Hara got the better of him, and he wants to marry her, and he's lying about it. Again, it's pretty funny. He'd be willing to marry her, and say married to her for his life. I mean, he could always divorce her, I guess, but that he'd be willing to lie about. But if it actually also involved paying out money, then he wouldn't be making it up. All right. Anyway, but what we have is that now we are dealing with Rabbi Yehuda's position that we assume that she has not been raped, applied not only in policy areas like Knas and Ksuva, but even in great cases like the question about her allowance to marry a Kohen. Let's just get to the beginning of, let's end here because this is like, we're going to continue with this and we're not going to have a chance to get to the rest of the next statement. Yes?
Am I understanding this correctly? He's going to inspect her and decide whether he's going to...
No, made by...